Welcome to the SBI Podcast, offering CEOs, sales and marketing leaders ideas to make the number.
Welcome, SBI Podcast listeners and video podcast viewers. My name is Dan Perry, and this is my, I guess, good pal, Eric Australia, E for short. We're with SBI, a sales and marketing company dedicated to helping you make your number. On this web show and audio podcast, we feature topics and tutorials that will help you make your number. By tuning in, you can leverage best practices and receive how-to instruction on some of the most prevalent go-to-market problems that exist in today's complex selling world.
Yep. So Dan, I'll ask you a question. So did you ever wonder why some companies make their number every year and some struggle with consistent performance? Companies come to us every day and ask for help to help them get more consistency in making their number. But most don't even know where to start. And it really starts with strategic alignment. But first, let's define it. Dan, can you define that for us?
Yeah. So strategic alignment, Eric, begins with a clear understanding of the corporate strategy, followed by a grasp of the interdependencies among the various functional strategies. To truly be strategically aligned, you must link these internal strategies with external market conditions. Now, this has been proven difficult. SBI found that 91% of companies are misaligned. And the main reason is the realization that companies really have tactics masquerading as strategy. This results in a lot of waste, or as we define it as thrashing, tons of work with little productivity gains. So today, we're going to understand how to develop and deploy a successful sales process. Developing, designing, and deploying a successful sales process is an important part of your sales strategy, right? So the sales strategy must be in alignment and with the corporate, product, marketing, and talent strategies. And the sales process within the sales strategy be built around two very important points, Eric: the way the buyer wants to buy and the way the corporate strategy is built.
Yeah, so you brought up a really good point. So sales strategy aligning to the corporate strategy and aligning to the sales strategy, because sales process is a tactic to execute the strategy, right? So what we don't want to do, because you actually talked about it earlier, is confuse tactic with strategy, right? Yep. And sales process is a tactic. Okay. So a successful sales process must really be built around the buying process, right? You talked about a little bit this earlier.
Yeah.
So, but it also must have the core foundation of the corporate strategy in it, meaning how do we actually win, right? This is aligned to the buyer and to your company.
So Eric, obviously I'm going to ask you the question, how would we do this?
Yeah, so it's a good question, right? So we're going to be using SBI's Revenue Growth Strategy Workbook titled How to Make Your Number in 2016. We're going to focus on page 165 to 166 in the report, and if you want to follow along at home. And if you want a copy of this workbook, go to salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-report. And if you want to have somebody from SBI teach you how to use it, sign up for a workshop at salesbenchmarkindex/2016-workshop. Again, if you want the report, -report. If you want somebody's help, -workshop.
Yep, got it. All right, let's get started. So Eric, let's first show and briefly define a sales strategy methodology. I think that's a good foundation to start, and where sales process actually fits in it. So the 5-step SBI process that we have with the sales strategy methodology begins with a core foundation, planning. The first step is developing sales and data plans that will allow the company to make the number. Without proper planning, you get poor performance. Next is engagement, Eric. Briefly put, this is defining the processes which the sales team will interact with the prospects and customers. This is firmly where sales process fits in our methodology. And really, it's, again, a core foundation of a sales strategy. A tactic, but a core tactic.
Yep.
All right. Third is organization. This is making sure the organizational structure is set up correctly so the right people are in the right roles to execute the processes. Fourth, execution. Executing the strategy by focusing on areas like sales enablement, pipeline forecast management. Execution of the sales process is critical to its success. And finally, E, it's support. Helping the sales team be effective in perpetuity by supporting them and making the internal organization easy to do business with. This is called a sequenced methodology. Obviously, you should in best practice, start with planning and work your way to support. This will help ensure alignment and prevent our known term now, thrashing, right? Sequencing here, again, is paramount. All right.
Got it.
So now we understand the sales strategy methodology. It's evident that developing and deploying the correct sales process is critical to the overall sales strategy and strategic alignment.
Cool. So thanks, Dan. That was a good explanation, right? So deploying a proper sales process can bring big benefits to an organization, right? So our internal research shows that when you actually deploy a proper sales process that's aligned to sales strategy and corporate strategy, you have a 33% higher in win rates than those sales teams without them, right? 20% shorter sales cycles. So I'm just going to pause there. So why do I care? So if I'm the head of sales, why do I care about those things?
Yeah. So think about that, right? If I can get a better win rate and a shorter sales cycle length, what does that mean for my lifetime value of my customer? What does it mean for my ability to go on more sales calls and get more deals done? Mm-hmm. What is my ability to lower my customer acquisition cost?
Boom, that's where I was going with it, Dan. So if I think about it, right, so I might have shorter sales cycles, right? So that means now I can actually reallocate time towards acquiring more customers without adding cost.
Yep.
Right? So that's more or less the definition of customer acquisition cost there.
By the way, it's fascinating to me, Eric, when we've got some more stats on sales process here, but organizations who don't use a sales process, and we talk about major corporations who don't use sales processes, and they look at the waste or potential waste that they're doing, time waste, as well as the loss in productivity, win rate, and sales cycle length.
Yeah, to me, they're likely inefficient in their execution, right, as a result. Yeah. So let's go back to the benefits of having a sales process, right? So 6x higher probability of success to make the number. Let me repeat that because that's a profound statement. 6x probability higher of making your number, right? So that means I'm improving by 6 times in order to make my number if I deploy a good sales methodology that is aligned and executes my sales strategy.
Amazing.
Yep. So lastly, and a 19% greater quota attainment with multiple sales processes versus a single sales process.
Okay, whoa. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so what's a multiple sales process versus a single? I thought companies just had one.
Yep. So remember, your sales process needs to be aligned to the buyer process. So in all likelihood, our audience has multiple buyers within their different segments of the market, right? So they could be different sales channels, like an inside salesperson versus an outside salesperson, right? So likely 2 different buyers selling 2 different products or buying 2 different products, or indirect channel versus a direct channel, right? Or different product segments might have different sales processes. Because the buying behavior is different for those, then we should actually have a sales process aligned to the buying behavior, right? That's market alignment right there. So if I go back to this, there's overwhelming evidence that developing and deploying a sales process improves revenue. So let's begin the discussion on how to develop and deploy one. But before we do, I'm going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, it's all about sales process, Dan.
Great. That's good.
Each day, you receive hundreds of emails, tons of text messages, countless telephone calls, and sit in too many meetings. How do you find ideas to make the number with all this noise? The SBI blog filters all this nonsense for you and presents only first-rate ideas to make the number. Simplify your life. Subscribe to one blog and read the best content. Go to salesbenchmarkindex.com and subscribe today.
Welcome back. I'm Dan Perry. This is my good buddy, Eric Estrella, better known as E, and we're with SBI. So today we're trying to help you make your 2016 number by developing and deploying a sales process. To follow along at home, we're inside SBI's Revenue Growth Strategy Workbook titled How to Make Your Number in 2016. If you want a copy of this workbook, go to salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-report.
Got it. Thanks, Dan. So before the break, we discussed SBI's 5-step sales strategy methodology. We learned that the second step in the 5-step process is engagement. And this is where sales process fits. We also discuss how the sales process must have two critical elements in it, right? It needs to be one, mapped to your buyer process, and two, in alignment with the market and corporate strategy.
But what the problem is that we're really trying to solve with the sales process, winning more deals in less time. And the reality is decision makers are making purchases differently today. Traditional sales process based on needs development and solution positioning will cause the majority of your reps to miss the number. But we all kind of know this, right? We know that the buyer has changed. So because of that, and because the buyer continues to change, we've developed 7 questions that you must ask as we begin to develop and deploy a sales process to solve this problem. So let's describe and give best practice on each one, Eric, so the listeners and viewers of this show can get help answering them. And for those of you following along at home, these are on pages 165 and 166 of our Revenue Growth Strategy Workbook titled How to Make Your Number in 2016.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. So these 7 questions help you realize that you should stop using an old inward-out sales process and develop a new outward-in sales process. I'm going to pause there. So inward out versus outward in. How would you explain that to our audience?
Yeah, so an inward out sales process simply has it as its core foundation, sales activities and exit criteria that the sales rep does. So whatever behaviors the sales rep does. Whereas in simplicity, an outward in sales process is all centered around what the buyer does and the buyer activities.
Got it.
Right? Now, believe it or not, right, we've been through these phases of buying activity and the buying decision process being made and us entering as salespeople in the buying process later and later stages. There are still sales processes out there that are inward out focused. And when we do that, we're not in alignment with the buyer or his buying or their buying process. And because of that, we get out of sync.
Got it. So simple definition, inward out is meaning it's our view of the world, but when it really should be outward in, that's the buyer's view of the world. Yep. That's their journey, and we should map our sales process to it.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, cool. So the first question is this. It's simple, yet neglected by most companies. What does a buyer want from us at the later stages of their decision process? And Dan, why would we ask this question right out of the gates?
Yeah, it's critical. It's critical in understanding the customer's buying process, Eric. So mapping the customer's buying process through great market research develops the most effective sales processes. Understanding late-stage buying helps us influence early-stage buying. And if we know what the customer wants, we can potentially get in early in the deal and influence those requirements. We can also distinguish the sales process into 2 different processes: opportunity management and account management. Opportunity management being hunting for new deals, account management being farming existing accounts into cross-sell, upsell.
So this is another example of how we actually talked about earlier, multiple sales processes.
Yep.
So hunter-farmer is another perfect example for that.
Absolutely, right?
Cool.
And those organizations that try to combine those don't do as well.
Got it.
All right, let's get to question 2. Hi, Eric, how will we know when a buyer exits one stage and enters the next stage?
Got it. So this is what we call exit criteria, right? So this is buyer behavior that the buyer exhibits, right? That's either noticed or documented by the sales team. So once this is completed, the buyer has moved on to their next buying stage. And therefore, we can then move on to our next sales stage. Because remember, sales process is aligned to the buyer process, right? Too often, though, sales reps move along the sales stages as a result of solely of what they do, they being the sales reps. Hey, I sent them a proposal, therefore we should actually be in negotiation at this point, right? Yeah. How many times have you guys heard your sales rep, say that? So they must create actions and activities that help move buyers along. But buyers sometimes move at their own pace as well. So a good sales process recognizes this and places buyer-driven exit criteria into the sales process. A lot of you in our audience call it verifiable outcomes. Call it exit criteria. Again, it's something that the buyer demonstrates to say that he or she is ready for the next stage in the buying process.
So someone who's never done this before, this is new to them, right?
Okay.
But those have already done this and mapped them and already have developed these exit criteria. What advice do you have for them, the more mature organizations who want to go to the next stage in their sales process development?
Yep. So maybe they have mapped the stages. Maybe you have mapped some of the exit criteria, but have you really mapped maybe the micro questions that the buyer is actually asking along those ways? Have you mapped your content to that micro question, right, in the specific stage? Do you have specific major interactions called out on the sales stages to know, to get that buyer from stimulated to problem definition or whatever your stage names are in the actual sales process?
Yeah, I add to E. One of the other things you want to do, everything you mentioned was great, but also understanding now where each member of the buying decision team is on the buying process and then the sales process, and then reacting differently to each member. For instance, in technology sale, you've got a CIO, you might have a,
functional leader, sales, right?
Director of networking, potentially, if you're selling networking gear, a purchasing person, maybe even a CFO, because CIOs now, a lot of them report to CFOs. They have different objectives, different wants, different needs along that buying process and now sales process. And those advanced organizations map those and understand where everyone in the buying decision team is at.
Yeah, it's the sales process is there to get that collective yes, not just the collection of yeses.
Correct.
So
it's good. All right. So Eric, you identified these exit criteria through market research. Simply put, you talk to your customers, interview them and survey them. Find out what they go through to make a purchase and how they proceed. Then document their significant actions into sales stage exit criteria. That's how you develop these things, right? If you don't, your reps will probably rush the sales process, not be aligned to the buying process, and the proverbial customer will go dark appears.
Got it, Dan. So market research is the key to getting it right?
Yep.
So let's get into the third question here.
You got it.
So what is our process for turning buyer interest into a purchase decision with us?
Yeah, you spent a heck of a lot of time on this one, right?
Absolutely.
This is not only an early stage buying, but obviously continues through the entire sales process and involves actions such as uncovering root problems, influencing and building consensus of the buying decision team. You talked about that already, and making it easy for them to do business with us.
Got it. So building this into your sales process takes skill, right? So if this was easy, everybody would be doing it, right? Skill to recognize how your buyer finds value, how you need to uncover true problems, and build job aids that help a salesperson proceed effectively and efficiently through the process. We identify these critical moments as major interactions, right? It's the moment of truth. So if done well, a sale moves forward. If screwed up, it can literally die, right? On the spot. Boom. Identifying where these major interactions occur along the buying process allows you to map them into your sales process at the most critical times. So let's get into question number 4.
But wait, major interactions.
Yeah.
Call plans. These are the things you got to plan. So you never wing a major interaction.
So what's on a call plan? What goes on a call plan?
So a call plan could be as simple as what's your objectives of the call, not only yours but the customer's. It can be as in-depth as writing out questions that you want to ask and then get the answers for. And also preparing yourself by understanding the solution and where the gaps are and what you have to ask to fill those gaps up, and understanding the problem and then fit the solution to it.
Yep. So what I'm hearing is it's preparation, right? So it's to actually write something down so you're prepared for that major interaction.
So if I had $1 for every time I went on a major interaction with my sales reps that didn't do a call plan, I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's unbelievable how we don't plan for our calls.
Take those dollars to Vegas.
Exactly. All right. You mentioned question 4.
So what resources does a sales team need when executing the sales process, right? So this understands what the customer values. Do they need a technical expert, a subject matter expert, a SME? Will they get value out of a demo? Should we develop an ROI job aid so our sales reps can articulate the value better?
Yeah. This is not only goes into the people needed, but the tools needed. Things that can come to mind for me, right, are a CPQ, or configure price quote process. That's part of the sales process, right? It simplifies the way that we can configure price and quote a solution. Call plans, I mentioned this. How about CRM systems? maybe even sales management coaching to the sales process, right? The list of resources needs to be thorough through the eyes of the customer while delivering our corporate strategy. Remember, buying process, eyes of the customer, and our corporate strategy is critical in this. Always ask yourself when examining resources to use or develop, will the customer value it, and does it follow our corporate strategy? Then it's money well spent to develop and deploy it. Now, here's another example of this. I mentioned call plans before. If you have a product differentiation corporate strategy versus a customer intimate corporate strategy, would the call plan differ?
Potentially, right? So theoretically, the value that we're trying to convey to that customer is likely going to be different, right? So depending on where you're at in the sales process, right? If they're evaluating that solution, and we have a product-driven sales strategy, we might want to bring in a SME at that point, a subject matter expert, to differentiate our solution. We might want to bring a technical engineer if you're selling it some type of technical product, right? Versus customer intimate, we might want to just try to do a dinner or something like that and not worry so much about product differentiation. You're trying to differentiate yourself as a customer, right? As a vendor.
Yeah.
So again, the call plan, the tactics would be different based off what your corporate strategy is.
Yep, got it. All right, so moving along to question 5. So Eric, how are we going to get the sales team to adopt the sales process? Now, obviously, no process is worth anything unless it's adopted by the sales team. Getting them to use the process rests squarely on the shoulders of the senior leadership.
Yep. So all of us as sales leaders, sales enablement leaders, sales operations leaders know that adoption is difficult, right? So we've seen best sales process go down in flames if really the CEO doesn't endorse it and doesn't use it themselves, right? An example of this would be forecasting discussions, right? Everyone in the company should be using the sales process stage names when forecasting, right? You shouldn't be using words like commit or upside or best case or pipeline, right? I know everybody out there is guilty of doing it. I was guilty in my past as well, right? But when you're actually following the sales stage names, then it's driving that behavior. It's driving that adoption within the organization. So there's full accountability, from the tops down. So.
Yeah, that's a great point, Eric. When we use these tough, funky terms like commit and upside, why don't we just use the sales stage names?
Yeah,
right?
Because remember, it's an objective view as to where that deal is progressing because it's buyer driven.
Yeah.
Right?
So I want to call everyone out right now that's using those terms. Stop using those terms and use sales stage names. Because what it'll reinforce your buyer-driven sales process if you develop it that way. And it'll also allow you to actually, over time, get the probability of close because you'll be able to track that through your CRM system. So now, I agree that we should add the sales managers as coaches to the process as well. This happens long after the training is complete. So coaching, forecasting, and using it when discussing deals, all non-negotiable as a sales process adoption. But I would say that the most important thing is the coaching, right? So after the training that's complete, we go into trying to have the salespeople master the content, and that's where most organizations break down. Make sure we have a coaching methodology and a coaching plan in place to enable the coaching and make it effective, right?
Totally agree, yeah. We've said it a million times, right? Frontline sales managers should be spending 75 to 80% of their time coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys, it's time for the short commercial break, but don't go anywhere. On the other side of this break, we're going to answer questions 6 and 7 and tie it all up with what the next steps in developing and deploying a successful sales process really is.
You are watching SBI TV. This is a monthly web TV show featuring guests just like you, executives trying to grow their revenues. Each month, you can peek behind the scenes and watch your peers discuss their strategies for how they make their numbers. You are not going to want to miss this.
Welcome back. I am Dan Perry, and this is my good friend Eric Estrella, and we are with SBI. Today, we are trying to help you make your 2016 number by defining how to develop and deploy a successful sales process. There are 7 questions leaders must answer to complete one. We have answered 5 so far. So Eric, let's complete the last 2.
Cool. So Dan, what we're going to do is, for those of you following along at home, we're using SBI's Revenue Growth Strategy Workbook titled How to Make Your Number in 2016. If you want a copy of this workbook, go to salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-report. So Dan, will you, question 6, take us away.
Got it. Question 6. How are we going to make the sales process easy to execute with technology? Now, this blends right into question 5 about adoption, right? Mm-hmm. We need to embed the sales process into your CRM system. Literally, you can't turn the thing on without using the sales process. And what this does then is easily allow each opportunity to be tracked along the sales stages. And with the exit criteria and job aids clearly used in the CRM, the ease of adoption dramatically increases.
Yeah, we can also use mobile sales tools, right, to help the sales process. Think of playbooks, right? Think about having your iPad, in a meeting with the sales stages there, feeding content directly to you, a push mentality, right? Yep. To a sales rep, that's invaluable. That's the moment of truth, right? That's more or less the definition of sales enablement.
Perfect.
But the success is going to rely on the simplicity of the process. If it's too complex, we don't allow for technology to be used, when building the process, it will sit on a shelf and it won't be used.
Yeah, and that's the worst case kind of process, is to just sit on the shelf. And boy, can we tell you how many sales processes we've come across that have on the shelf not being used.
Yep.
All right, final question, Eric. Number 7. How are we going to track metrics that indicate success and or failure of the sales process? Now, metrics are broken down into 3 categories. Tracking the proper metrics is critical to show success of the sales reps. And if we have to adapt the process to the ever-changing buyer, the metrics give us an early warning sign that we need to evolve.
Got it. So Dan, some of the most common metrics that we know today, we already have discussed, right? Win rate, sales cycle length, average deal size, average sales price. But those are all lagging indicators, right? And or leading indicators. We need to mention some behavioral indicators. For example, this would include number of call plans to complete, right? We talked about those job aids. Are you doing them or not? That's a behavioral indicator. Number of days in the field for the sales managers. Are they coaching, right? It's a behavioral indicator. Referrals generated, training time realized, there's dozens, right? What we want to do is pick 3 to 5. Right, so let's get good at those 3 to 5.
So start there. What I'm thinking about is like a triangle, right? In the bottom of the triangle, we've got our behavioral indicators, the foundation or base.
Right.
Middle, we have our leading indicators.
Yeah, that could be like pipeline to quota ratio.
Exactly.
Number of opportunities added, in a given
Forecast
quarter.
accuracy.
Correct.
And then up on the very top of the pyramid, right, is our lagging indicators.
Revenue,
right.
win rate,
margin,
deal size.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if you think through, the behavioral indicators affect the leading indicators, which affect the lagging indicators, right? So
absolutely
critical that we're successful there. All right. So we're out of time today, but we had a great discussion around the core questions you need to answer to develop a successful sales process. And it all ties back into strategic alignment. The process needs to match the corporate strategy to be in this alignment. And development of it should have the corporate strategy always in the forefront. So if you're interested in learning more about strategic alignment and how it helps you develop and design a successful sales process, you can sign up for a workshop at salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-workshop. We would like to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in. And if you enjoyed this show, I suggest you subscribe to SBI TV at salesbenchmarkindex.com/TV, or you can find us at our SBI YouTube channel. We've got some outstanding content in future episodes that you will not want to miss. So until then, Eric and I wish you the best of luck as you try and make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on SBI services, case studies, the SBI team and how we work, or to subscribe to our other offerings, please visit us at salesbenchmarkindex.com.